we'll start the recording. Everybody say hi to YouTube. We'll just go through this really quick. So there was the Darkest Hour QA session that was hosted by Soma. He was the moderator. He was joined by Jay Griffey, Arcane Armor, So Bad Strange, Odin, and Terry Sangwa Park, who is the CEO of Ironmace Games. And then Ju-Hun Choi, otherwise known as SDF, joined them like several minutes in. So Soma invited guys from a separate podcast to join them for the session. And then they kind of just started slinging questions. It was 2.5 hours. So we have a lot of notes. They asked some more pointed questions following the podcast that I did with them, the Q&A session that we did last night, to ask them more specifics, and then ask them about kind of like some of the ideas that they had for like classes and the progression systems and what their vision was for the season and whatnot. So they are looking at trying to remove, and this is something that was mentioned last night, this new patch is going to be, if they can get away with it, the removal of pre-match lobbies. So the idea of everybody kind of gathering around like in the tavern or around a campfire or whatever to be able to like see each other and inspect each other, all of that is going away in this next patch when the game wipes. So there won't be any more of that. People are going to queue and then they're just going to end up in the game. That eliminates the scouting that has been going on in lobbies. It eliminates the ability for people that are teaming to potentially end up seeing whether or not they're actually teamed up inside, like when they're in that lobby camping, getting ready. So it eliminates an awful lot of that, where people wouldn't necessarily know whether or not they're in the actual same game with their friend or not. So, further clouding whether or not that actually happens. They said that with this patch, they're trying to, with some of these systems, focus on the casual gamer. So when it comes to like the mastery level stuff, this training system thing where they're getting the learning tokens and reward tokens and all of that stuff, they're trying to focus more on getting like that first master level character starting to feel like a grind, being something they don't want to have happen, which is why they implemented these reward tokens, which are designed to be able to like give you a piece of gear like every so many levels, so it doesn't feel like it's just some endless weird grind where there's a gap between like level 20 and like or level 15 really and like level 100. So periodically you're going to be able to get a token for like a free piece of gear. The way that these tokens work, and I know that we've talked about this kind of like a lot, the tokens get to be like selections of pools. So as soon as you get your first character to level 100, there's that first one highlighted in gold over there on the right. That is the training master. He has his own pool of like perks and stuff that are unique to him. Remember, like I mentioned something like longbow mastery, stuff like that is unique to him specifically. So there are going to be like additional perks and talents and stuff for like mastering certain, I guess, weapons or armor pieces or something along those lines that will allow you to be able to like take advantage of him if you don't have another character or class or whatever that you've leveled up to 100 plus. If you want to get specific with it, then you need to have at least 2 characters that are level 100 plus. Because when you get to like level 100, one of those characters becomes a master. So let's say, for instance, again, if I had a barb that wanted to learn how to use hide, I would have to have a rogue that's level 100 and a barbarian that's level 100, get one of these learning tokens, and then use that learning token, select the rogue, and then what happens is from that entire pool, which is all of their skills and abilities, all of their perks, and if they're a caster, also includes their spells. Of those things, an RNG thing hits, and you get 3 of those at random to choose from, as if you were playing like a card-based style roguelike game. Those three choices, you pick one. Maybe it's hide, maybe it's not. It could be any of those skills or abilities. Once awarded, once you choose that choice is then removed from the pool of the character that you took that skill or ability from, and then you would need another token to try your hand at getting another one. Reward tokens can be used on the class master if you want to instead, or on others, like other of your own characters. But whoever's going to receive it has to have a token to spend to then select whichever one they're going to learn from. What they did say that was unique was that for spells, for instance, if you wanted to learn like a wizard spell, spells won't be in that pool at first because you would need to know spell memory before you could start learning spells. So the spells won't be in the original pool. It will just be like, for a wizard in this case, it would be their perks and then their abilities would be in that pool, just them. If you decided that you wanted spells and you got spell memory and you learned it, then all of the spells would also be included in that potential pool. So it would further dilute the pool, but you would have spells to potentially choose from then. So the prereqs in this case, prerequisites for like Bard or Wizard would be first. And then once those prereqs are unlocked, then you would have the ability to be able to get the spells after that, right? So that's kind of cool. Perks and skills. So they talked about perks and skills. There's a massive perk and skill rework happening. What they're trying to do as a baseline is have every class have around 10 perks. So they're trying to normalize it so that the RNG effect for every class is roughly the same, but some of them will fall short because not every class even has, it doesn't have that many perks. Where like, something like a rogue, they have a shit ton of them, but other classes have way, way less, right? So they're trying to get it so that it's normalized around about 10 perks. A couple of classes, they said, will probably fall just slightly short of that, but they're trying. Class identity stuff, there was a question about whether or not like the loss of class identity would be a problem, because if somebody doesn't want to multi-class, how do they still feel like they're staying strong versus people doing the multi-class stuff? So there was kind of like a double answer here. The first one is that this season is kind of devoted to the idea of they want you to multi-class. Like they're kind of pushing you in that direction because they want us to like break the game and see if we can find those like really messed up like meta builds, like Superman build outs, that they then would look at the system and go like, all right, how do we modify and fix this? Because again, it's about testing. They said that they may potentially in the future, they've toyed with ideas of implementing penalties if you use learning tokens, like some type of stat penalty or something, or like ability usage penalty, so that it's not as strong when you decide to do the multi-class stuff, but they're unsure. Or the idea of having like perks with levels. So you can have a wizard that does a fireball specialization where they have a stronger like level 2 fireball versus just like a level 1 basic bitch fireball. So they don't really know like what direction they would potentially go in, but the season again is about multi-classing, and they want people to like make and break these like wild class combos to see if they can find like some really broken shit. There is a diminishing return system that they're playing with for XP and leveling, where the XP gain as time goes on takes a little bit longer between levels as you get more and more of these learning tokens. They don't have any belief in implementing any type of respec system right now. They also thought about like having like this potentially like a traveling merchant or somebody, some specialist or something that could reset your coin counts for a fee, but they show up like once a week. But he says that those things raise issues with like RMT stuff, because then if it's like for a gold thing, you could just have people that pay a third-party RMTer for the gold that they need in order to be able to afford to constantly respec if that's what they wanted to do. Loophole abuses, all those other kinds of things. So they're trying to figure out a way where the diminishing return kind of kicks in as a disincentive, maybe potentially, or something that becomes too grindy where like the grind just really slows down to a halt. But really the idea is that people are kind of like forced into experimenting with whatever it is that they're choosing for their classes that they've leveled, instead of trying to make that Superman build, like, and everybody ends up getting like these cookie cutter ultra meta like cuck builds that everyone becomes a carbon copy of everybody else, and which will honestly probably be the way that people try to do that anyway, because the ultra hardcores will level to a point where it stops being beneficial to do it versus just starting over, and then they scrap the character and start over, which is kind of, honestly, that's just kind of where the devs kind of were looking at having people go anyway, from what it sounds like, where like let's say you level up your teachers and then you end up having that core class that you're trying to like really make into like perfection. It sounds like they kind of want you to do like the scrapping and start over thing, kind of like how a roguelike would work, where you're trying to get like that perfect hand dealt to you. Which is an interesting take. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, especially if the idea is to like try and gain rankings and whatnot for like leaderboard systems and all that other stuff. But again, like they just want to break the game. So what the fuck? They also said if it gets too easy to make like that Superman build, then the idea that they've got here doesn't pan. And they're trying to work from this motto of like doing the best you can with whatever it is that you get. So again, like, I don't know if I necessarily get behind that one. I've never really seen anybody try to take that approach with a game like this ever before. So that's fucking crazy to me. But we'll see how it goes, man. Like, I'm down to try anything. But this one is new for me. I haven't really seen anybody take a PvP approach with that type of mechanic before, and we'll see how it pans. They're also changing the full seasonal cycle. Instead of it being a 90-day season, they're looking at more like an 8-week season within a 2-week interim. Again, it's something that they're trying to modify on the fly. They basically decided like 90 days is too long because people, again, losing interest and, player counts dropping off, people kind of accomplishing whatever they wanted to. The vast majority of the player base that was achieving most of what they were were achieving were doing it in about 2 months. So they're going to try and like shorten it, like shrink it up a little bit. And if that's too short, then they'll modify it again. But they're trying to find like that perfect sweet spot. They said that they're considering doing like maybe a skill tree system where you're like allocating like skill tree points. That seems like it would be even more involved than like this idea that they've got now with these learning tokens, because that causes a whole bunch more balancing issues, especially when you start looking at like build diversity and people wanting to be able to like make wild and wacky shit. It may not work out so hot, and it usually takes an awful lot of work to be able to make that something that's balanced depending on where people are putting those points. But again, you know, some will have to see. Part of these reworks that they're doing is also going to include the rogue. They're modifying hide for sure, and they're making it more like an active camouflage kind of thing that you would have seen in like MGS, where it's more like light refraction kind of effects and like that predator-esque like light refraction stuff when they're on the move, and then when they sit completely still, they fade into camouflage. So, which a lot of people, it seems, a lot of people were like, that's cool with me. So maybe it ends up working. I'm interested to see. They talked about TTK. SDF says he likes really short TTKs. Terry likes to have longer fights, so they're kind of like push and pull back and forth on that, trying to find some happy spot where like people are kind of compromising on it being like short TTK versus like fast TTK, or sorry, short versus long. TTK being time to kill, for those of you that don't know. SDF said that there will never be a stamina system in the game when it comes to like active combat mechanics. He doesn't like stamina systems for a game like this. He doesn't think that it fits. I agree. I don't think that this game needs a stamina system at all. They also made mention, and this was friggin' wild, they made mention that they have, like, one of the guys that works in their combat, like, works on their combat, was a former #1 world-ranked, Korean-based, like, international champion Tekken player. And I was like, who? And it turns out, like, through people in chat that kind of, like, knew the dev team a little bit more, told me that it was Nee, which is insane, because he's, like, the Michael Jordan of Tekken. He's like, there is no one better, arguably, at Tekken over the course of Tekken's history than Nee, which is absolutely friggin' wild, and it blew my goddamn mind that he works for Ironmace. So that's actually a massive dub. If he's helping them with their combat system, I think is amazing, and I hope that he lends like a lot of insight for them. That is such a wild thing to hear. I was beside myself when I heard that. That was absolutely crazy. Quest requirement stuff. So the question was asked about like solo, duo, trio, being forced to have to, like, if you're primarily a solo player, being forced to have to go to like duo and or trio maps for things like boss kills and all this other stuff. Was there going to be like this differentiation where like a solo player could complete it all versus like being forced into duos or forced into trios for like certain quest goals? And according to SDF, the way that this works is first there's like this weekly gating system. So on the onset, this isn't really something that people are necessarily going to have to worry about for a little while, but they aren't going to cater toward the idea of like a singular team size. They said flat out the idea is to experiment in different team sizes, going to different maps, etc. They want people to have to go and experience it all. So they will not be catering to the idea of somebody that only wants to play solo or somebody that only wants to do duos or only trios. If you want to be a completionist, you will have to experience the game in all aspects. And again, this is something that I agree with. No one ever said that you can't play the game as a solo player the entire time that you want to play the game. You can do that. You just might not achieve everything that you want to be able to achieve because the game isn't just for you. It's for all different sizes of players. So if you want to be a completionist and finish the game, completely or whatever, do all of the quests, then you have to start like conforming to those structural sizes and get it done that way. If you don't have friends, try and make some. Otherwise, play a class or something along those lines where you know that you can beat GK or you can beat Lich or both or whatever by yourself. If you can pull it off, there's videos on YouTube of people doing it. Probably for just about every class now, soloing them. If there's videos of that exist, and you can work on building to a point where you can do that on your own. Until then, like figure it out. Either adapt to it or don't. But you can always play the game as a solo player. You don't have to do that otherwise. Random matchmaking, auto matchmaking was something that got discussed. SDF mentioned it before. They said it's a high priority item along with the creation of Arena, which is something that they mentioned later on down the line, like more specifically. But they said that there's a couple of items of higher priority at the moment, which I would probably figure are like Druid, Ice Abyss, Wyvern, that kind of stuff are probably in front of this. But it being a high priority item means that we're not going to be waiting too god-awful long, and it's coming. So it looks like there's going to be some form of auto matchmaking queue where if you want to join a team of 3 and want to go in on an RNG basis, which will probably be heavily tied to the karma system, would be my guess, that will probably end up being a thing at some point in the next couple of months. And by the way, they're not giving any more dates on like completion stuff because again, like gamers justifiably in some ways are holding their feet to the fire on like certain dates that they had set out originally and been like, yeah, we'd like to have this done in a month, and obviously misjudged that because again, they're hands to keyboard devs and they don't necessarily have a good idea on timelines or like setbacks and all that stuff. So they're trying not to like over promise and under deliver anymore. It's kind of just like, we're working on it. When it's ready, we'll tell you. And people are just going to have to be patient. And if I may, dude, that's exactly what they did with Tarkov. And as much as people bitch, dude still played it, and they had 5-6 million units over the last 6 or 7 years sold. So I think if people are going to complain about them not making dates or whatever, they're just going to have to cope. They're also, for anti-cheat, they are working on this anti-cheat system where they create cheater-only lobbies, very similar to how FromSoft does it, where a cheater gets flagged and that cheater doesn't have their account banned. Instead, they're put into a lobby that is comprised of just cheaters, and then they have to play against only cheaters, and they'll be miserable, and then go get another account somehow, if that's what they end up doing. Druid timeline and animal forms. SDF said that he wants to make a Druid as quickly as possible, but their track record for the dates hasn't been good, so they're not going to focus on giving dates. The person responsible for the design of Druid and characters, the one guy, that one guy has been out sick, and they're trying to get him to a point now where he's able to kind of get caught back up if possible. But the foundation of the Druid is done. It sounded as though they had a bear form, and then they definitely confirmed that a rat form, which they said looks like you're running around like an ant or whatever, like on the ground level, which I can't wait to see, is done. They said the time now that they need is for like an animation or feel of that character class to be right. Just ban cheaters. How's that so difficult if they already flagged? If you had somebody that's actively cheating, right? And you ban the account. The moment that you ban the account, if there's somebody that's adamant about it, they will go and buy another account. If you put that cheater into a cheater-only lobby, it's less likely that they catch on as fast. And, it's a little bit more of a delay in time for them to then go out and get that other account if that's what they end up doing, right? But if they're in cheater-only lobbies and they get alienated from the market, or if they get put in like a cheater-only marketplace or something along those lines, in a lot of ways, those people that are cheating, they don't necessarily realize it right away. So it's just a way to delay that process of them like coming to the realization that they've been banned or alienated and then going off and buying another account, right? So it further delays the cheater's existence in like the non-cheating community, right? That's kind of the idea. Goblin Caves. So the old 3x3 structure is coming back, meaning the maps shifting and then having Troll and now Cyclops being like RNG bosses in both of those situations. There was a question of whether or not they would do the 5x5 map instead or add it to the RNG rotation. They said it's not really possible because the 5x5 map's larger. There would need to be a larger population, and they can't dynamically like just shift between those based on those lobby sizes. So it's possible that they do like periods of time where we get the 5x5 map instead, or they shift to that. I'm okay with it either way. I'm not very big on the 5x5 map flow. In certain sections of that map, it's kind of shitty, but I see the merit to the 5x5 map with like the two bosses, and then there's like if you kill them both, then you got the treasure room in the middle. Like the dynamic of that map is cool in the parts of it that actually work. It's getting the rest of it right that is like problematic. They said, like, for now, no, they're not going to do the 5x5 thing, but they might end up looking into it as the season progresses, so we'll see. Then we talked about Ruins, or they talked about Ruins. Ruins was too open, according to SDF. Again, it was too open of a map. The sight lines were too long. It was very heavily, like, range favoring. So what they are trying to do now is create more obstructions, like more sightline interruptions, so that it cuts down on those sight lines for the range characters to kind of dominate because they're too heavily favored. So that they're looking at doing that, creating more like overhead coverings so that the double jump stuff doesn't really it doesn't become as much of a thing, where people are like able to get up like into the skybox in certain areas and like walk on top of invisible roofs of buildings that they shouldn't be able to access. So they're looking into making like more natural structures that obscure those things so that people aren't just like running into like invisible barriers and that kind of stuff. 5x5 duo trio. So like if it's going to end up being one or the other for now, for sure, because they're trying to cut down on the number of pools of queuing people based on, again, like the size of the player base. But, they could argue that one until we're blue in the face. And, it just comes down to population. Frost Cavern, they said, was deemed to be a success by the team, even though it's moving to like a duo-only map. I actually agree with this. Frost Cavern is difficult, and yeah, the mob density is high, but Frost Cavern is a really, really good map once you learn how to play it. And, even as a solo, once you know what you're doing, you're clearing like 2 and 3 modules on your own. As a duo map, you can speed clear like a third of that map with just you and a buddy, no problem. And kill the 4 Wendigos in like the north and northeast corner. You can absolutely get work done on that map for sure. I'm actually fine with them saying that this was a success. I agree. I think the map was good. I like it a lot, and I like the difficulty of it. And there was a lot of good loot. So I don't see where there was as much of an issue. I think that the guys that were complaining about mob density and whatnot were just like working on trying to get the idea of how to play it down. And certain classes have more problems than others, but as a duo, the idea is to like counteract the weaknesses of your partner. You don't go in, you don't necessarily go in with like a pair of wizards. You go in with like, a complementary comp. Right? Ice Abyss. No date for Ice Abyss as of yet. They jokingly said, like with a chuckle, they said it was far away. The boss being tuned to duos, there was a question if it was going to be tuned to duos or not. The idea with the boss as it sits in SDF's mind right now is that the boss is like too big and too strong or whatever for just 2 people. So the boss is designed in a way where you need to make some kind of like shaky alliance with another duo to go down and take on the boss, which will end up being like really weird because you have to make friends, not only make friends with a duo, but you have to make friends with a capable duo that's willing to try and take on the boss, given the size and strength of it, and then work in a coordinated way over VoIP to pull it off. And I think that is going to be tough. That's going to be tough. But I'm looking forward to it, man. I think that'll be cool. They also said that duos is staying. Terry said that he's confident that he convinced SDF to not delete duos from the game. Like duos looks like it's staying. No more like worry about whether or not duos is going to get removed. Like duos is in the game. They talked about gold gear. All right, and this is a huge piece of information actually. So they believe that the intro of the marketplace changed how the gear disparity was working in the game in a huge way. People had the ability to just rebuy stuff as long as they had the gold and get back into the fight. As long as they could afford it, they could get like their best in slot stuff and then just go back. Legendary gear in a traditional sense, like if you just find it on a map somewhere, tended to not be like all that like quote unquote legendary. It wasn't like perfectly statted, but the crafted stuff typically was, because people every half an hour would just look and see what the vendor was offering, and then if it was a good item, they'd use their materials and then make it. So the majority of the crafted stuff was typically like best in slot because you were on that mill just looking for something good to make, and that's the stuff that usually ended up like out in the game. So you had like all this preferential crafted gear because the stats were always good. So making that high-end gear, first and foremost, they said, is going to be much, much rarer. Like obtaining that high-end gear is going to be much rarer at the start of the season. So legendaries, they said, are going to be very, very rare. And finding a unique on a boss, for instance, in like 3's HR is going to be like a unicorn. Like it's going to be one of those where like if somebody gets a unique, it's going to be a Reddit post and the whole community is going to know about it. That's how rare it's going to be. They also said that anything better than purple is not going to be craftable this season. So no more legendary crafting of items. All legendary plus items have to be found in a dungeon now. And average legendary gear is not going to be like the stuff that drops on a map isn't going to be typically like really good stats. Crafted items are also going back to a list of unknown stats. So just like when you go to the Goblin Merchant for Gamba and how you don't know what the stats are, if you go to the Candy Merchant, it says unknown on all those slots. That's how crafted gear is going back to. That's what it used to be at the start. And then they changed it to like, well, you can see the stats now. They're putting it back. So they're going to make it so that all of the stats are going to be RNG rolls and you're not going to know what it is until you buy it. But they're also making the crafting of all of that stuff less expensive. So instead of it being, 5 gold bars or 5, well, I guess in this case it would be like 5 ruby silver bars, let's say, to make a chess piece. Maybe it ends up being like 3 or something. I don't know. But they're making the crafting of the gear less expensive so that it offsets the value of like the ore and stuff that people are going to be mining. Can solos get best in slot? Meaning like the ability to find uniques, killing Troll and Cyclops. They said no. They think that that's too easy to obtain through just like flat out grinding and killing those bosses because they're very farmable. The unique loot in this case right now on that map is the Mystic Gem Room, which has an extremely low chance to spawn a unique as it is. It will be even lower at the start of the season. They're unsure if that's going to stay the same through time, but will likely end up being changed. Meaning it may not be the Mystic Gem Room that ends up having the chance for the unique. It could end up being something else. Or they may remove the ability to get uniques in just pure solo altogether. They don't know. There was a question about them marketing the game. They don't have a marketing guy as of yet. What they're trying to do is currently they're leveraging Blacksmith for this gift code system that they've implemented where you can purchase a copy of the game and get a gift code like as a gift and give that key to somebody else for the game, or you can get like a trial key. So what they said that they're going to do is that the guys with Chaff Games, for example, that have the ability now for nothing to migrate from Chaff Games over to the Blacksmith launcher. They're trying to bring everybody in-house. So they're doing that for free, and anybody that has Chaff Games can migrate it over to Blacksmith. They've had a lot of people do that already. What they're going to do is that people that have migrated over to the Blacksmith launcher are all going to get a free 10-day trial key to like give to a buddy, so that way they can try out the game for nothing. I think that's actually like a huge benefit because it's a good way to be able to market the game to people and have them play it and experience it without having to like part with money to try it. And I think that'll bring in a lot more fresh blood. And people on those 10-day trial accounts are absolutely going to be people that Jay is going to pickpocket the fuck out of because they're not going to know what the hell they're doing. And I think it's going to be good content. Dev team said that for this season, what they're going to try to do is play the game more often because they feel like there's a disconnect between their level of understanding of the game that they're building. And this is really common for game devs because they spend so much time building the game. They don't spend a whole lot of time playing the game. They said that they have one dedicated QA tester and they need a lot more people in the office like playing the game. So for like devs that say that they don't play their own game a lot, that's really common actually. So they're trying to get people in the office to like play their own game a lot more so that when guys like us that are playing the game like 8 and 10, 12 hours a day come back to them with feedback, they understand where we're coming from and they realize it. We don't end up having moments like what happened with the AP farming video where I mentioned like splitting candy ends up giving more AP because the stack doesn't give it to you. Terry didn't know that that was a mechanic that existed until after I told them. Like in that video, he watched it and went like, oh, that's in our game. So like that kind of stuff, they want to make sure that they already kind of are able to self-identify a bit and don't necessarily need as much community feedback telling them like, oh, by the way, this mechanic's broken, which I think will obviously help with the process. Okay. They said that they were hiring a lot of people. They're trying to hire more. They actually reached capacity in the second office, and now they're going to have to change floors to an even larger one because including the remote people, they are at a capacity of about 60 devs. They only have seats in the core office for like 58 people. So they've actually exceeded capacity, but 2 of the people that are working for them are remote. So they are at physical capacity in Korea. They're trying to hire game devs. But they said that initially when they were trying to do this hiring, their image in Korea was harmed due to this like negative initial narrative with the lawsuit that was going on. And they had some hiring issues in Korea because a lot of people would shy away from the game, from the company. And they're also looking for people that are fans of Dark and Darker. If they're going to hire them, they want to hire people that are already familiar with the game. They think that the game is popular enough. And like there's devs that exist that would be familiar with the game enough to where hiring like hardcore players of the game wouldn't be impossible. So they actually said like if there's anybody that's in like the Korean region that plays the game a lot, they want to look at hiring them if they're a game dev. But they're not opposed to hiring people remotely. It's just like, you know, more like an on contract or like per diem kind of thing than anything. Grayson mentioned that Arena isn't going to be what we think it's going to be like at a core, right? Like typically like arenas, you go in, you like bash on people, then you end up getting like your MMR rank up or rank down, and everybody talks shit to each other all salty, and then it kind of moves on from there. In this case, Grayson mentioned in a comment like on Discord that that's not what we think it's going to be necessarily. They've been toying with this idea of making it so that gear is lootable off of the losing team or not. So originally he talked about like this thumbs up or thumbs down system where like you'd have like this end screen and then the winning team would vote as to whether or not they're going to kill the losing team. And in doing so, then you would end up getting loot windows and could like take all of their shit if you wanted to, which would be done 100% of the time, let's be honest, because somebody's going to want to take that ring, right? Like there's no one is going to let the other guys live unless they already knew each other or something. and all of them were like in gold gear and like had some gentleman's agreement in advance that they were just gonna like let them have their stuff back, right? It sounds badass on paper, but it also sounds incredibly disheartening. And I don't know how many people would necessarily go in there unless they figured they just had like an absurd amount of money, or just, you know, they had a cleft chin like the Grand Canyon. What my thought was on this was like, what if they lost like one piece of gear, like per person that lost? So like team leader, you know, like you got your team and then you beat the other guys, and then the team confers, and then team leader chooses a piece of gear from each one of the losing members. Like for me, that's like, okay, well, there's your penalty, but you're not like completely screwed. Whether or not they even go that route is unknown. As of right now, they said that they're not going to have it as a gear loss thing. They said that like players aren't going to lose their gear. If you lose, it's kind of just like you're going to go in and fight. But they're looking at like different systems with having like maybe separate consumables or separate sets of gear or whatever that are more tailored toward like an arena style battle, and have it be like a bit of a separate system all together versus like having it somewhat impact like the core game. So, which I also think is not necessarily a bad idea, because they have to have some uniquity with Arena. Otherwise, it's just going to end up being like Tarkov Arena, which was one weekend like fucking dead on arrival, and still is, you know. So that would end up being a problem. Putting coins on the line, yeah, you could put skill coins on the line, or like item coins on the line, you know, bet on your own match or something like that. Would, you know, pay a coin for ante, you know, and then like the winner gets knowledge tokens or something like that would be fine. Then they said like they're trying to continue doing like and keep having more direct communication with the community. They like being like very involved with the community. They said like flat out like send us DMs, let us know what you think, give us your feedback, etc., etc. And then they asked like in summary, like this is kind of what the idea is for the season. So they're trying to find the right season length. 3 months being too long. They're unsure whether 2 months is going to be too short, but they're looking at like 8 weeks with a 2-week interim period. That's kind of the idea. Then they're trying to work on improving like the overall health of the game. I'm assuming that is like balance changes and, you know, network infrastructure, you know, making that better. You know, all the things that like the community keeps saying that they need more of when it comes to like balances and you know, fixing the lag and stutters and, you know, continuing to improve it. And like on the netcode side, like I've actually noticed over the last couple of weeks at least, like it has improved. There were times when I would log in and it was like for the first 25 seconds I'm running around the map and I'm just rubber banding all over the place. I haven't had that happen in the last couple of weeks. Like it's like little pockets of it, especially but in like the last 5 days when I've been like living in the game because of this subathon, it has been way better. So then Terry also mentioned like the purpose of this is to like break the game with the multi-class system and like literal like Wild West to see what people will build and what becomes like meta, like super build, overpowered, whatever. And then they'll end up adjusting it if they need to on the back end. In so far as marketing push stuff, they don't believe that they're ready for a big marketing push for this season. They don't think that they're ready for like a we're back kind of like statement just yet. But they're looking at the, you know, stuff like with the trial codes, and then eventually looking at Twitch drops and stuff. But that's going to be like months down the line. So I don't know if it would be like next season, but maybe like the season after. Maybe like it's end up being like a season 4 kind of thing. We would end up seeing like the Twitch drops push. The way that he described it was he talked about like this player-based graph where like when the season starts, you see like this spike and then it starts tailing off, right? And they're looking at like how steeply that slope goes down, because no matter what, you're going to end up having bleed. Every game that does like seasonal wipes like this ends up having bleed. They're just trying to see like how the rate of bleed works. What they're looking for is that you have that spike of the player base, and then after it's been around for a few days, you see the graph start to tail up a little bit. So what they're trying to do is get the content that in the netcode, whatever else, the mechanics of the game, to be in a good enough spot to where the hype continues and you see an influx of new players after the wipe occurs, to where the graph goes up after like that's happened. When that occurs, they said that's when they're like, okay, now we'll do the marketing push and try to like really get the player base numbers to take off. And I think that that's smart. I think that's really smart. And I like the way that they're trying to look at this from a marketing perspective, because, you know, you're trying to strike when the iron's hot. I like that idea a lot. And then the final thing that they mentioned was if it's a legal thing to do, once they're able to get on like Steam or Epic Games again, which it sounds like obviously like they sounds like they're optimistic the way that they were talking. It sounds like, you know, they're really pushing forward on that, and they believe that it's going to happen at some point in the future. They said if it's legal to do, they will absolutely offer people the ability to migrate to whatever platform of their choice for free, regardless, once they are able to do it. I don't know what the legal stuff is with Steam and like game sales and whether or not they allow migrations over to like Steam as a platform. I would assume that it comes as at a cost to the dev team to be able to just generate keys for everybody. I don't think that's really something they're allowed to do. But if they can pull it off, like what the hell? Like I'm down. And that would alleviate a whole lot of issues. And if they could do it for everybody that was on Blacksmith, then they don't need Blacksmith anymore and they can just focus on going through Steam and do it that way, like through that platform. And I think that would be ideal for them. For sure. But that is like the entire, I guess, summary. So we truncated it into about 30 minutes from 2.5 hours. I think that's pretty good. So that's I think that pretty much covers the podcast that those guys did. I don't think I missed anything. You're only allowed 2,000 keys per game and have to submit a claim to get more. Well, there you go. So I would argue that the player base is more than 2,000 people. So that's probably going to be a problem. And then the wipe is, which they, we've said this already, said it in the last summary. The wipe is by 11:59 in 59 seconds PM GMT on Friday the 15th. So in 2 days by midnight GMT, all right, by midnight the 16th GMT, that's when the patch will be. Okay? And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. Rerun on YouTube. Yeah. Well, kind of.